It took 2 days to destroy the life of my abusive mother. My name is Erin. I cut contact with her 6 years ago because staying in her orbit cost me more than I could afford. My peace, my sense of self, the small trust I had left. Her name is Hope. She is 63, and the wounds she left behind aren't small stories I can shrug off. They shaped the way I learned to walk away. A while back, I reconnected with my niece, Eva, 18. After I disappeared, Hope became Eva's caregiver for a time, and Eva, kind, stubborn, and fiercely loyal, decided to help her financially even after she moved away. I didn't interfere. That was Eva's choice, and given everything Hope had done to me and to our siblings, I respected Eva's autonomy. My brothers and sisters felt the same. Hope had burned those bridges long ago. Eva left her cash card with Hope under one simple condition. Hope had to notify her before making any deposits or withdrawals beyond everyday purchases. Hope was free to use the card for groceries, toiletries, whatever she needed. But if she planned to move money, hand the card to someone else, or do anything outside normal use, she had to tell Eva first. Eva regularly topped up the card and even paid Hope's rent a year in advance, so Hope wouldn't end up homeless. That payment was meant as a safety net, not an invitation to ignore boundaries. When I say Hope damaged me when I was young, I mean she did things that left lasting scars and taught me that silence and escape were sometimes the only sane choices. That history is why I refused to get pulled back in, and why my siblings did too. Those wounds explain why we vanished, and why I keep my distance, even when family looks different from what it should. For months, Hope had been stretching the agreement like a rubber band. Small withdrawals here, unexplained little transfers there. And Eva noticed, but let it slide. She told herself it was easier to keep peace than to pick another fight with someone who had been alone for too long. Then yesterday, it got worse. Eva found out Hope had handed the card to another person and let them use it freely, putting money on it, withdrawing cash, treating it like their own. That crossed a line. This wasn't about a loaf of bread or a taxi fare anymore. It was handing the keys to someone else and trusting them with Eva's money. Eva messaged Hope. She asked why the card was being used without notice, who the other person was, and how Hope could justify breaking their agreement. Hope's tactic was immediate and rehearsed. She flipped the script and played the victim like an artist. In a message, she told Eva that she was being unreasonable and ungrateful, that she had no choice, and that if Eva truly meant to help, she should do it quietly. No conditions, no complaints. Hope's exact line was something like, "If you really want to help me, do it without words and without conditions. You don't get to complain." She even threw in the personal condemnation, that Eva was free to abandon her and betray her, just like Erin and the others did. It stung because it was the same line I had heard when I was younger, the same absolutes, the same blaming of the person trying to help. Hope's message wasn't just defensive. It was a demand for absolute loyalty and silence, backed up by moral guilt. If you help me, you must accept everything I do and never question. That kind of manipulation had hollowed out my family once. Seeing it directed at Eva felt like déjà vu in the worst possible way. We sat up late that night with the phone between us like an evidence bag. Eva slid the screenshots across the screen. Hope's messages, the transaction timestamps, the photo of the card in someone else's hand. I read them once, then again. Nothing in there surprised me the way it might surprise someone new to this pattern. I recognized the choreography. Denial, blame, dramatic self-sacrifice, then moral lecturing wrapped in righteous hurt. I told Eva what I always tell anyone who's just been gaslit by her. This is not your fault. I said it flat, like handing over a bandage. I told her about my childhood versions of the same conversation, how I used to get blamed for being too cold, too distant, ungrateful, too small-hearted for wanting rules. I reminded her that people like Hope shape arguments so that anyone who questions them looks like the aggressor. That's how they survive scrutiny. By making it look like you're the problem for even wanting boundaries. Eva listened with that fierce, exhausted look teenagers get when they're old and young at once. She'd tried to keep calm in her messages to Hope, to lay out the agreement, the consequences, and the concrete ways Hope had breached trust. She'd been rational, precise, no yelling, lots of facts. That's what made Hope's reply so revealing. Instead of addressing the specific violations, giving the card away, failing to notify, letting others withdraw cash, Hope turned everything into an attack on Eva's character. I've had the same brushstrokes painted across my own life. You don't understand. You're cruel. You forced me into this. Classic redirect. Eva asked me if I had ever gotten an apology like she'd asked for. I told her no. I told her the one thing that finally ended it for me. Acceptance that the person would never change. That's not defeat. It's a choice. You choose your own life, not to be rearranged by someone else's drama. I told her how I'd learned to protect myself, not out of spite, but out of survival. There was a moment when Eva said, quietly, I thought maybe this time would be different. I wanted to say everything at once, about hope and heartbreak and how cruel the word family can be when used as a leash, but I kept it simple. It's okay to wish things were different, I said. It's not your responsibility to fix her. You can love her from a distance if you want, but you do not have to hand her the keys to your life. By the end of the night, we made a plan. Eva would lock the card if she needed to, document everything, and preserve her own safety, financial and emotional. I promised to be there. I promised, too, that if Hope tried to bring other relatives into the story with lies, we would set the record straight. It felt like a small, stubborn reclaiming of agency. And in families like ours, that's sometimes all you get. The next morning, Eva messaged Hope again. This time not with questions, but with a demand for an apology. She laid it out, point by point. The agreement about notifying before any non-routine use, every unexplained withdrawal and deposit, the photo of the card in someone else's hand, the risk of fraud and the legal exposure if the card kept getting passed around. She wrote clearly, calmly, and with a hurt that was almost surgical. You promised. You broke the promise. This could get me into real trouble. I need you to own it. She sent me screenshots afterward. The messages were long and measured. They read like someone trying to hold on to dignity while naming facts. Eva wasn't dramatic about it. She didn't lecture or yell. She simply pointed out the practical consequences and the emotional ones. Betrayal, broken trust, the feeling of being taken for granted. You could tell she'd rehearsed the words because nobody wants to use language like that unless they've been pushed. Hope's reply was exactly the thing I feared. Performative hurt and gaslight-tinged righteousness rolled into one. She wrote that she understood and then turned the tables in a single breath. You are blaming me for being a terrible person, she said. I do not want to fight. Go away, live your life. Feel free to not care about me anymore. I would rather be homeless than be treated like that. Reading that, I felt the old familiar churn, anger because it was so predictable, and a small, cold relief, because predictability is a map. Hope had chosen the martyr route. Make the person who calls you out look cruel, make yourself the wounded one, and threaten the very thing the other person tried to prevent. It was manipulation in a sentence. After that message, the tone between them shifted from negotiation to finality. Eva had done everything she could to set boundaries and explain the stakes. Hope had refused responsibility and weaponized victimhood in return. The moment crystallized into something simple. Hope would not accept the terms she had previously agreed to, and Eva was no longer required to pretend otherwise. The rest of the consequences, the fallout, the calls, the decisions to be made, were now inevitable. The next move was practical and merciless in its simplicity. Eva locked the card. No more withdrawals, no more surprise transfers. The person Hope had handed it to couldn't use it anymore. That one click felt like a governor snapping into place. Small, legal, irreversible. Eva also told Hope she would not be paying rent anymore. I watched her type it out and felt a strange mix of relief and fury. Relief because someone finally enforced the boundary. Fury because it had taken so long and so much goodwill to get here. Then Eva did something braver. She called every relative she knew who had supported Hope over the years. She laid out, calmly and clearly, the facts. Screenshots, timestamps, the photo of the card in another hand, Hope's messages. People were shocked. Many had no idea about how Hope had behaved toward her own children and grandchildren. What they'd been told by Hope was a softer, partial narrative. Once the details were in front of them, they shifted. Their support evaporated, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief and betrayal at having been misled. They told Eva they would not be helping Hope anymore. They offered Eva their full support and, in many cases, encouraged her to cut contact and protect herself. They asked about me. Hearing their names over the phone felt like opening a door I'd shut years ago. I had lived with some of them as a child. I hadn't called since turning 18, for reasons that were messy and entirely my fault. I love them, but I had never wanted to pull them into our family chaos. Hope had always been adept at playing the sympathetic sibling to outsiders while doing damage inside the house. Eva gave me their numbers. I planned to call them that Saturday and tell them what really happened. It was a strange thought. I was about to walk back into a past I had left in order to make sure Hope could not hollow out anyone else's compassion. Hope had quietly cultivated a few old teachers of mine, the kind who remember quiet kids and mentor them in odd ways. I didn't like the idea of her leaning on them with half-truths, so I started hunting for their contact details too, the old, sticky notebook of names and the vague memory of a guidance counselor's office number. I wanted them to know the full story before Hope spun a comforting lie about how abandoned and misunderstood she was. I was not interested in public shaming or spectacle. I wanted the people Hope relied on to have the facts so they could make an informed choice about whether to help her. I do not know if those calls will change everything. Maybe some will still choose to believe Hope's version, or maybe they'll feel uncomfortable stepping into a family fight. I can live with that uncertainty. What I cannot bear is watching Hope use other people as shields the way she used us. I'm not trying to destroy her for the joy of it. I'm trying to make it impossible for her to keep lying about who she is without facing the consequences. That is not vengeance for vengeance's sake. It's boundary enforcement on a communal scale. Meanwhile, because the real work was the human one, I took Eva into my home. She moved in with my husband and me. At first, it was awkward. 2 generations at our kitchen table, polite laughs while we figured out toothbrush storage and whose turn it was to buy milk. But during the nights when the light was low and the world quiet, Eva would talk about the small, ordinary things she missed or feared. I watched her reclaim pieces of herself that Hope had tried to define away, a stubborn streak, a love for sketching, a habit of making playlists for rainy days. I remember watching my own reflection in her frightened, fierce eyes and feeling that familiar knot, the thing that had made me leave in the first place. I am not trying to replace what she lost. I am trying not to let her lose any more of herself. That is the real, quiet revenge. Not humiliation, but protection. Not celebration, but prevention. For once, someone in this family set a boundary and followed through. That, to me, already feels like justice. Two days. That's all it took for everything to collapse around Hope. 2 days for the cracks she had been papering over with guilt and manipulation to finally split open. She lost her financial safety net, her rent coverage, and the quiet sympathy of relatives who had once believed her stories. Her circle of trust, those few people who still answered her calls, had evaporated. By the time the phone stopped ringing, she had no one left to lean on, not because anyone wanted her to suffer, but because she had taught every one of us what happened when we tried to help. Eva blocked her number and moved on. She spends mornings now with a sketchbook and coffee instead of checking her phone in dread. My husband and I give her space to breathe, and sometimes, in the evening, she hums along to songs while cooking. The sound is unremarkable to anyone else, but to me it's a kind of proof that peace can return to people who've lived too long in fear of a phone call. As for Hope, there's no dramatic ending, no shouting, no courtroom or confrontation, just quiet absence, the silence where her voice used to be. I sometimes imagine her pacing in that small apartment, realizing that the sympathy she once counted on is gone. It isn't revenge in the cinematic sense. It's consequence catching up. I've told myself that what we did wasn't about cruelty. It was about stopping the harm before it reached another generation. For years, Hope believed she could keep rewriting the story, victim here, savior there. But the truth has a way of staying upright once you stop holding it down. In the end, she's alone and we're free. Eva is rebuilding, and I'm learning that justice doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it just looks like a quiet house, a locked card, and a young woman finally sleeping through the night.